What is up, everybody? My name is Clint. I am with Fire Pit Sports, and we are a brand new family-friendly sports platform. Now, we are going to have a podcast coming soon. We're going to call it the Couch Warmers, and that's going to hit shortly after the NFL draft. We're going to give our reaction to that. But here in YouTube land, you're going to see sort of the highlights of that podcast. We will be doing college football reactions as the season goes along, and sports history. And that's sports across all platforms. We can talk about NBA history, NHL history, NFL history, college football history. Why? Because it's fun. It's insightful, and we can always learn from history, right? So today, in the spirit of learning, we have decided to focus on the confusing and somewhat bizarre history of the college football national championship. So I got a couple quick questions for you. First, the Yankees. How many World Series have the Yankees won? 27, right? We know that because they have a playoff. And even before the playoff that we see today, you had the two best teams from each league face off. Those two teams played everybody in their league throughout the season. And they had it started out with a 9-game series, but it eventually went to a 7-game World Series. So there's no debate. You don't hear any questions about strength of schedule or quality wins. In 1927, the Yankees won the World Series. They won it in 1928. They won it in 1932, and so on and so on. So how many national championships has Alabama won? 18? Is that really the number? Well, you see it on the helmets that they have, their little souvenir helmets. You see it on T-shirts. Alabama fans have that number memorized. They know that they won 18 national championships. But have they won 18? Well, the NCAA says they've won 16. And if you take all the selectors into play, they've actually won 23. And why is this? Because college football has yet to settle on a single source that decides the national championship. Well, now we have a playoff, I know. But there are still, to this day, 11 selectors of national champions. Normally they follow the college football results, the playoff results. A couple times they haven't. And for the most part, even up until 2014 when we started the playoffs, they were selected by people. Coaches, people in the media. Yes, there were some mathematical equations thrown in there every once in a while. But the one that the NC2A relies on, they don't really give credit to any of the mathematical systems. They only go off polls. And the AP poll and the UPI or the coaches poll have been their main go-tos over the years. So to give you a little example of the madness, take the year 1950. How many champions were there? Well, if you read the NCAA's website, it says there's one, Oklahoma. Now, Oklahoma got selected by 6 different sources over the years, but since 2 of them were the AP and the UPI, which is what we call the coaches poll now, the NCAA lists just Oklahoma. But what about Tennessee? They had 6 selectors pick them. One of them, although it was retroactively, is a selector that the NCAA cites for its champions up until 1936. What about Princeton? Well, they had 2 mathematical systems select them, and those systems are no longer around today. There's actually a claim by Kentucky, the Billingsley Report. Now, that was a system that was invented in 1970. That's 20 years after that season was over with. But I'm gonna pick on Kentucky fans for a little bit because they actually went a step further with that. If you go into Kentucky's trophy room, you will see a championship trophy that they had made for the 1950 season. And on that trophy, it says the national champion, as if they were the only one. But that trophy was basically given to them 20 years after the season was over with, and they actually had to make it themselves. There was no trophy for the Billingsley Report. So why is this so confusing? Well, I can't tell you why in 1979 the National Championship Foundation decided to poll its viewers for a champion over the last 100 years and then pick a champion for every year college football had been around. I can't tell you why they did that. I can't tell you why there have been at least 40 different selectors over the years. I can't even tell you why we need to have a national championship for every season going back to 1869. But I can tell you this, that in its infancy, college football, it was very regional. And it was only played in the Northeast by a few schools for the first nearly 20 years it was around. And by the time it was noticed, people saw how violent it was, and they wanted to ban it. In fact, in 1897, the New York Times wrote an article listing two curable evils: lynching and college football. They looked at college football in the same way that they saw lynching. In 1904, the Chicago Tribune reported 18 deaths while just under 160 serious injuries playing college football. And one of those injuries was to the son of the president of the United States at that time, Theodore Roosevelt. And that is when Theodore Roosevelt stepped in, because before 1906, there were vague rules. In fact, up until 1881, they had no real set rules. The game looked more like rugby than it does as we see football. No pads. There were a lot of people just clocking somebody and just knocking them to the ground in between the whistles. So what did the president do? Well, he got 4 Ivy League school presidents together, and they had to fix the sport, which they did. So they started making rule changes that made the sport less violent, like they established a neutral zone. They also legalized the forward pass. And it was in 1906 that you saw the formation of the NCAA. Now, the first ever attempt to crown a national championship was actually in 1900. And it was a mathematical equation to determine who the national championship was at that time. And then between that year and 1936, there were 8 systems that came and went and attempted to use mathematical methods to research and crown a national championship. They were systems that were invented by one person and ran by one person. The Dunkel system was created in 1929. That's pretty much the only one that's still around today. But it was in 1936 that a respectable poll emerged that ranked teams as the season was going on, and whoever they picked number 1 at the end of the season was a national championship, and that was the AP poll. It was comprised of journalists and members of the media who would probably be more likely to watch all of the games in their region. Again, regionalized at this point. It was 1936. I'm sure a reporter in Southern California wasn't going to be able to see what Alabama was doing, but at least you had a poll. People could follow. And then in 1950, the United Press put a poll together, and they polled coaches. And so the NCAA that we know today started using this as its main source for crowning a national champion, despite the presence of some of these other selectors. And another thing that's really confusing, and when you try to sort through who has a claim for the national title, then there are several polls or systems that were created in the 1970s, and I think a couple in the 1980s, that then went retroactively and started determining national championships on their own. I mentioned the National Championship Foundation from 1979. They went as far back as 1869, where there were only 2 teams playing, and guess what? They split it. There was no clear one team at that point either. So in my opinion, anyone that claims a national title before 1936, it really isn't a true claim. Because before then, it was just algorithms, and they used various individuals, and most of them between 1869 and 1936, like I said before, were given out retroactively. So after that season was over. Now, being a Tennessee fan, I would even debunk 3 of their claims. They claim 6 national titles. It's really 2, 1951 and 1998. I would almost be willing to give them the 1938 title, but that's really about it. I'm only going to really say that 3 of their claims are legit. As far as Alabama goes, that's time for another video, because it's a whole other conversation with the Crimson Tide. So what we're going to do now is fast forward to 1992. And why that year is special is because that was when an actual attempt was made to get the number 1 team and the number 2 team to play each other on the field as kind of a de facto national championship game. So it was called the Bowl Coalition, and it was the commissioners of these bowl committees that said, well, we're going to try to at least make one game that's 1 versus 2. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, bowl games usually follow a pattern where a bowl might say, well, I'm going to take an ACC team and an SEC team, like ACC team number 3 versus SEC team number 4 or whatever. But in this case, they were going to forego that to get number 1 and number 2 to play each other. The only holdout, of course, was the Rose Bowl. And in the first year of the bowl coalition, it was Alabama versus Miami, and the 92 Alabama Crimson Tide absolutely destroyed the number 1 Miami Hurricanes. Now, same name, different goal. They changed their name to the Bowl Alliance in 1995, and that would actually go on to dissolve after the 1997 season. In 1997, number 1 Nebraska played number 3 Tennessee in the Orange Bowl. Nebraska won, so the coaches poll gave them the national championship. And then in the Rose Bowl, because the Rose Bowl wasn't part of that, they hosted number 2 Michigan, and Michigan won. So the AP actually voted for Michigan. And then there came the BCS. That started in 1998. And what this was a combined kind of mathematical equation along with polls, and it even included a score for strength of schedule. And the coaches poll actually agreed that whoever won that BCS national championship game, they were going to vote as national champion. So we had a system that could go past the records and go past the polls, and it could find the true number 1 versus number 2 matchup. And we were going to do that, so the struggle was over until 2003. And what happened in 2003? You had 3 teams finish the season with 1 loss. So who was going to play for the national title? And the BCS national title game was actually LSU and Oklahoma. LSU won the game. USC, which was left out of that game, won their bowl game. And the AP poll just said, well, we never said we would vote for the BCS national champion to be the national champion. So we're going to vote for Southern California, which defeated the entire purpose of the BCS. So what do? Well, they just changed the system and make it more about polls. So they started to come up with a system in 2003 that relied on the board account. Now, it's kind of a complicated thing, the board account and all the formulas that went into the BCS at that point. Without going into all that, and there's a lot of it I don't even understand, just know that this was an attempt to once again put number 1 and number 2 on the same field. So then in 2014, we got the college football playoffs, which at the very least, it is taking 4 teams they're playing each other, and then those 2 teams go into a playoff national champion. It is what I consider the determining factor of the national champion, regardless of the fact that there still are some other selectors that will pick another team. This playoff system is the best we're going to get. And then, of course, in 2025, we're going to expand that to 12. And then there's not going to be any more debate. Well, there will be debate, but there won't be any really serious logical debates at that time because everybody's going to get a chance to compete for a national title. Now, I know that was a very high level, very vague look into the history of the national championship. I'm sure you can take the years between about 1950 and probably into the 80s and come up with all kinds of discussions about who were teams that should have won a national championship and maybe teams that shouldn't have won a national championship. And if you do want to see that video, just comment below. But we are getting close to that magic number. And I wanted to go into something that I thought was actually pretty funny. And I say it's funny because in 1992, like we mentioned before, it was an effort to come up with the number 1 versus number 2 and come up with a true national champion. That was supposed to end the split national championships, but it absolutely didn't. In fact, it very rarely did end up with 1 national champion, even up until this day. If you go between 92 and 97, 5 out of the 6, there was a split national champion. You go to the BCS, 10 of 17, there was split national champions. And even at the college football playoff, there's been 2 seasons where a selector has voted for somebody else. Now, when I say split national champions, I'm not saying that I consider there to be split national champions. What I'm saying is that given all the selectors and everybody that the NCAA recognizes as the national championship selector, there has been split national champions. Obviously, I do not give UCF credit for being the 2017 national title. But it is kind of funny to look at and think about. And so what we're going to do is look at some of these teams that were split national champions, or I would say technically they were split national champions, and a lot of these guys were selected by things you've never even heard of. So let's pull that up for a second here. So as you can tell, there are some schools here that you had no clue had even somewhat of a legitimate claim to a national championship. I think it's hilarious that in 1992, when the first year of them trying to avoid a split national champion, the Sagarin ratings selected Florida State, who didn't even play in the Sugar Bowl, and they weren't even undefeated. They were actually 11-1 that year. Another one that stands out to me is 1996. You look, Florida State again. Florida State did lose in the national championship game, if you want to call it that, against Florida in 1996. To be fair, Florida State did beat Florida the last game of the season, but there was just one system that picked them to win a national champion. 1997, this one's kind of funny. Nebraska and Michigan split, but the Coley Matrix selected Tennessee. Now, I don't think that Peyton Manning is going to watch this video. I don't think he's going to watch this video anyway. But even if he were to watch this video, I doubt Peyton Manning would be screaming at the rooftops, hey, look, I did win a national championship in college. But it was the Coley Matrix. And you're going to see the Coley Matrix poke its ugly little head up a couple of times on this list. You will see there's a couple of times where they had the team that actually lost in the national championship game. 2006, Ohio State lost to Florida. And this really reveals all these people all the systems that were selecting national champions. It was really ranking systems. So what was the biggest enemy when college football was trying to come up with a de facto national champion? Math. Math was the biggest enemy, because a lot of times you see these ranking systems come up with a national champion. You're going to notice one right here. 2007, Missouri and USC. Neither one of these teams played for the national championship. LSU won that one. Math got them in that time. One that you may not have known, in 2010, it was TCU. Now, in that season, TCU, Auburn, and Oregon all finished undefeated, and TCU won their bowl game. That's Gary Patterson's TCU Horned Frogs, and they had one system called the CCR select them as the national championship. Now look at 2011. Alabama beats LSU in the national championship game, but somehow or another, the Coley Matrix picks Oklahoma State. I don't really see Mike Gundy watching this video, but like I said, if he were to watch this video, I doubt they would start printing up banners and making things to put up in the stadium about their 2011 national championship given to them by the Coley Matrix. Also, Alabama fans, you're going to notice this from 2012. Pretty big shellacking. It's a funny thing about the Coley Matrix, though, and the Coley Matrix actually picked Notre Dame in 2012 as well. The Coley Matrix presents itself as an unbiased system, but I guess they don't consider losing really big in national championship games as a method. So they're unbiased against teams losing in championship games, and they're going to pick the best team, right? They're going to pick the national champion. Alabama, don't go put 19 on that helmet just yet. That was the Coley Matrix that gave that one to you, even though you lost the national championship. This one was actually after the college football playoff was put into place. And the last one here, 2017, Alabama fans will remember this one. UCF got selected as the national champions from the Coley Matrix. Now, unlike a lot of teams on this schedule, UCF has actually picked up this ball and ran with it. And I don't know if they even realize that they were selected as 2017 national champions, but they have actually put this on their stadium. So if you go to a UCF football game, you will see 2017 2017 national champions on their stadium. They have made banners of this, and they call themselves the only 2017 undefeated national champions. And a lot of it was because Alabama came into that playoff game. They had lost a game to Auburn earlier that year. They ended up going all the way, winning the title. But since UCF beat Auburn in their bowl game, they say they're now national champions. It's cute, it's funny, but in no way are they 2017 national champions. I think everybody agrees. If you stuck UCF in that playoff system, just like what happened to Cincinnati a couple of years ago, probably not going to make it all the way through. Well, guys, I hope you've enjoyed it. I had a little fun today talking about the college football national champions. We are going to continue this a little bit moving forward. The next video, we are going to dive deeper into this subject because I think you could probably do 3 or even 4 videos about this. And we are going to examine the claims of the 18 national championships that have been claimed by the University of Alabama. So how many have they really won? Well, spoiler alert, it's not 18. So stay tuned for that one, guys. Again, hope you had a good time. I hope you learned something. Like and subscribe if you want to support the channel. We'll catch you later.